At every federal election, we vote to choose the people who will represent us in Parliament and govern the country. Parliament House in Canberra has been the home of federal government since 1927. Any member of the public is entitled to walk into the main foyer of the building, which is King's Hall. Here, we are immediately surrounded by the history of national parliament in Australia. In the year 1900, Queen Victoria sat at this table to sign the bill creating the Commonwealth of Australia. Up to then, the 6 states had governed their own areas separately, with no national parliament. The Duke of York inaugurated the first federal parliament in Melbourne in 1901. When Canberra was chosen as the new political capital, his son, the Duke of York, later King George VI, opened the first parliament here in 1927. Australia chose to follow the Westminster system of Britain, with a parliament consisting of 2 houses. The Crown is represented by the Governor-General. The final vote on laws which affect much of the quality of our lives is taken in these 2 houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House of Representatives is sometimes called the People's House. It consists of about 124 members elected to represent their constituencies for a period of 3 years. The Speaker presides as chairman from this chair, which is identical to its counterpart in Westminster. The party or coalition of parties with a majority of seats sits to the right of the Speaker as the government. The party or parties with a minority of members sits to the left as the opposition. The long benches on either side are occupied by ministers and opposition shadow ministers. The table of the House is the centre point, with the Prime Minister's place here, facing the Leader of the Opposition. At the head of the table, Clerk of the House, Chairman of Committees, and Deputy Clerk. Now, let's see the chamber in action. The assembly bells ring throughout the building for 5 minutes before Parliament sits. At 2 minutes to sitting time on the first day of the week, an old House of Commons tradition. The Sergeant-at-Arms shoulders the mace and leads the Speaker to the chamber, followed by the clerks of the House. The mace was a weapon of war from primitive days till the 16th century, when it became a symbol of the Crown's authority. It now stands for the power of the Speaker, who used to act as spokesman from the House to the King. This mace was given to Australia by the English House of Commons in 1951. It lies on the table when the Speaker is in the House, with orb and cross pointing to the government side.
Welfare of the people of Australia. Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come.
The day always begins with prayers.
As it is in heaven.
Parliament sits 3 days a week for about 75 days a year, divided into 2 periods, spring and autumn.
And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Clerk, petitions.
Petitions from certain citizens praying that pension payments be restored to twice.
Petitions from the public come next in order of business.
Isaacs, Riverina, Corio, Corangamite and Cunningham.
Questions without notice. Are there any questions? The Honourable Member for Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question without notice is addressed to the Treasurer. And I ask him...
Questions without notice is probably the most interesting and spontaneous part of the day. For 45 minutes, opposition members and government backbenchers alternate with questions to ministers on current issues. A minister often doesn't know what is coming. He may answer or ask that the question be put on notice when he can reply in writing.
There are certain tax avoidance consequences as a result of the abolition of gift duty, and one of the quite fascinating things is they continue to drag the issue of tax avoidance.
The House is usually well attended by members and by the press seated upstairs in the press gallery. It is easily the most popular time for visitors. And of course, the ABC broadcasts Parliament on radio.
Nothing to add to what I previously said on the subject of the 1.5 cent increase in tax indexation.
The Honourable Member for Wide Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I direct my question to the Right Honourable the Minister for Trade and Resources. Has the Minister seen reports which infer that the government's export drive will be prejudiced by delays in payment of export incentive claims? If so, what steps is he taking to rectify the position?
The Right Honourable the Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, there have been some articles recently on this matter. The delays have been caused through a number of reasons. Some of the forms have been incorrectly filled in. In some cases there's been disputes between companies and the export...
Although interjections are, strictly speaking, out of order, they add to the life and character of parliamentary debate.
Times have changed, but I venture to say this to the Honourable Member for Hunter: if the Treasurer imposed a tax on brains, you'd get a massive refund.
The Honourable Member will remain silent. There's no point of order. And
The Speaker seeks to keep order and decorum in the House and generally enforces the rules. He must be a Member of Parliament and is elected by a majority vote of the whole House. He himself only votes when there is a deadlock.
Will be to cover precisely the situation.
The Honourable Gentleman will
the Honourable Member.
The Honourable Minister will resume his seat.
The Speaker is a member of a political party and yet is required to be impartial to everybody. Do the roles conflict?
Yes, they do. It's difficult for a Speaker to make them work. I was elected as a Liberal. At the next election I'll stand as a Liberal. Therefore I have to remain in the mainstream of the party's philosophy and politics. I'll be opposed by the Labor Party and by other parties. I've got to win, naturally, to survive. But when I come here to Canberra and go into the House, I have to be totally impartial, objective in all things. I have to be able to represent the whole of the Parliament, regardless of parties. Whether I succeed in doing that is the judgment of the members.
Mr. Speaker has received letters from both the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition, and the Honourable Member for...
When the Speaker is absent, the Deputy Speaker presides over the House.
...discussion today. I therefore call upon those members who approve of the proposed discussion to rise in their places. The Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the newspapers, television and radio are currently ablaze with speculation about the latest batch of broken promises about to be served up to the Australian public.
Parliament is a forum for debate in a battle of words and numbers. Most of the time is taken up with government business, which is principally legislation. But there are some opportunities for opposition initiatives.
More disturbingly is over the same period.
The time allowed for each speech is strictly limited, with the final 60 seconds clearly signalled.
The Honourable the Treasurer.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this matter of public importance is about inevitably the comparative taxation records.
Members can follow the total business before the House in the notice paper. The daily agenda is listed in what is called the blue. Parliamentary service staff, headed by the Clerk of the House, record all decisions of the House and advise the Speaker and members on procedures.
Officers of the Parliament are permanent career officers. And whilst the House of Representatives is limited to terms of 3 years, and at the end of that time members must seek re-election, officers of the Parliament continue to serve without interruption. As servants of the House, they stand ready to serve all members of all parties quite impartially.
What are the main functions of the House of Representatives?
Because the House represents the direct vote of the people, it is the House in which the government of the country is formed. That party which at the election secures a majority of members becomes the governing party, and the leader of the majority party becomes the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister selects a team of members and some senators to form a ministry, and the ministry, aided by the public service, runs the government of the Commonwealth. A second function is to consider legislation, that is, proposed laws or bills. Most of these are prepared by the government. A third important function is to be a forum for debate, to debate all the important issues of the day relating to foreign affairs, defence, the economy, and social issues such as health and pensions, those issues which affect the lives of all people in the country.
Utah pays about $200 million in tax. Didn't say that. Didn't mention that. There's something wrong with that. He would have us believe that there's no tax at all paid. He didn't mention that this government has introduced a branch profits tax.
Hansard reporters record every word spoken in Parliament. They work in 10-minute shifts, except during question time, when they change twice as often. Daily copies of Hansard are distributed to members, the press, and various authorities.
He doesn't mention those facts. He tries to have us believe that because the company makes
Numbers in the House dwindle after question time, unless something special is due to come up. That does not mean parliamentarians have stopped working. The post arrives 4 times a day. Constant sorting means mail is delivered to members almost hourly. Voters can visit parliamentarians at Parliament House, so there is always constituency work to be done, as well as delegations to be met and speeches to prepare. Often they keep half an ear tuned to the House by a relay broadcast system in every office. Then there are committee meetings, where much of the groundwork of Parliament is done. Party committees, parliamentary committees, joint House committees. Members keep up with the news from home states, and there is a constant flow of information to be read and absorbed. Altogether, they may be in the building for 14 to 15 hours a day, with a few breaks. If they are needed in the House, they soon know it.
Is division required? The House will divide, ring the bells.
Bells and lights are everywhere. Green for the House of Representatives, red for the Senate. Members now have 2 minutes to get to the chamber. They learn to drop everything and move immediately. The summons may be to vote on an issue, which is called a division, or to make up a quorum when House attendance has dropped below 1/3 of members. If they're late, the doors are closed against them. In a ballot, this could mean a loss of its majority by the government, or, in the case of failure to make a quorum, the House can close down temporarily. In each party, there is a key person responsible for making sure members are there in the numbers needed, and that is the whip. The title is taken from 18th century fox hunting in England, where the whipper-in kept the hounds from straying.
Margaret, whoops.
Whips keep in touch with members by means of bleepers. Whips negotiate the time available to their parties and organise how best to use it in the House. The central power of Parliament lies with the executive. This is made up of approximately 27 ministers, led by the Prime Minister. The executive is chosen from members of both the House of Representatives and the Senate. Ministers direct their public service departments and see that their party's policies are carried out. They also work with Advisory Bureau. They look after their constituents and they initiate legislation. The opposition has its own shadow ministry, headed by the leader of the party. This is the Prime Minister's office. As the elected leader of the majority party, he oversees the total management of the government. This is where ministers meet in Cabinet. It's about 5 steps away from the Prime Minister's office. Here they have to put their case for new policies, legislation and expenditure. Ministerial colleagues vote for or against. Then ministers have to convince their party as a whole at weekly meetings held in the party room. At the same time, the opposition holds its party room meetings on policy and tactics. Now it's time for the government to report to Parliament.
Clerk.
If it's a new bill or the budget, the minister responsible introduces it. The first reading announces the bill, which is a proposed law. In the second reading debate, general principles are debated and a vote taken. Then, details are discussed and amendments made either by the House sitting as a whole within the chamber or outside in a multi-party committee. At the third reading stage, the bill is in its final form, which is then voted on.
The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Burke and Sydney. Tellers for the ayes, the honourable members for Petrie and Maranoa. Tellers for the no.
A vote can be taken on the voices, or the House literally divides. The ayes sit on the right of the Speaker's chair, the noes sit to the left, with 2 whips and 2 other members checking the numbers.
Result of the division, ayes 77, noes 47.
The House of Representatives is now ready to send the bill over to the Senate for review. But first, let's find out a little about the Senate. The Senate is the Red Chamber, with 64 members called senators. They are elected by a complex voting system to represent their state as a whole. Each original state has 10 senators who serve for 6 years. The Australian Capital Territory and the Northern Territory are each represented by 2 senators who serve 3-year terms. The chairman here is called the President. His chair was a gift from the Canadian government. The rest of the seating repeats the pattern of the House of Representatives. Government members on the right, opposition on the left. The leader of the government at the table here, opposition leader in the Senate on the other side. Also, Clerk of the Senate, Chairman of Committees and Deputy Clerk. The back seats are for invited visitors. Again, there is a public gallery, a press gallery and an ABC radio control booth. The chair behind the presidents is used by the Queen or the Governor-General when they open Parliament. Then members of both houses attend in the Senate. The other large chair is used by special guests like visiting heads of state.
Honourable Senators, the President.
The Senate has its own traditional ceremonies. The Usher of the Black Rod always escorts the President. Both his mode of dress and pine and silver staff of office are symbols of the dignity and conventions of Parliament. His office dates back to 1361.
Blackrod's office derives from a similar office in the United Kingdom. The office in the United Kingdom was actually established under Edward III as an office of the Order of the Garter. In 1522, Henry VIII moved his palace from the Palace of Westminster to the Palace of Whitehall, but he left his presence at the Palace of Westminster in the form of the Usher of the Black Rod, who was placed, amongst other duties, as being in charge of the doors of the High Court of Parliament, which sat at the Palace of Westminster. In Australia, unlike England, Black Rod is a career officer of the Department of the Senate. He has a number of duties in this office, amongst which are the ceremonial associated with the Senate, such as the openings of Parliament. In the openings of Parliament, he acts as the representative of Her Majesty the Queen or the Governor-General.
That question, he'll place it on notice. Senator Martin, order, please.
Mr. President, to ask a question without notice of the Minister for
The actual order of proceedings in the Senate is approximately the same as the House of Representatives, but the pace is more deliberate. Question time is longer by 15 minutes, and senators are allowed more time for speeches.
Approximately 100 miles off.
Mr. President, I'm delighted that the opposition are excited.
Hansard reports of what happens in Parliament are usually in galley form only 3 hours after the words have been spoken.
The fact is, of course, that intelligence...
Its purpose is to specify the existing powers to raise monies by the issue of approved securities, and to empower the Minister to provide a Commonwealth guarantee of repayment in connection with those securities stock.
Hansard takes 9 minutes to travel the 4 kilometres to the government printing office. The words are in print by 9 a.m. the next day, which is quicker than either England or America. The official weekly record can be bought at government bookshops in every capital city.
The Honourable Minister for Social Security, Senator Guilfoyle.
Mr. President, the Minister for Health advises that the United States Public Health Service Advisory Committee on Immunisation...
But the function of the House is different, as the Clerk of the Senate and author of the book Australian Senate Practice explains.
Well, there's a very real difference. The House of Representatives is what you can describe as the House of Government, because it's in that house where the party which has a majority of the seats is entitled to form the government. But the composition of the Senate plays no part at all in the determination of which party is entitled to form the government. We have our own very distinctive role. First of all, to exercise a reviewing function, checks and balances if you like, and the other one is to look after the interests of the states. On the first function about reviewing, the House of Representatives sends to us legislation which we feel is not in good shape. We're entitled to amend it and send it back to the other house, and no proposed law can become law until both houses agree. I think that might be described as the safety valve of the Australian federal system.
The Senate system of committees has been a vital part of its work since the early 70s. They examine the activities of all departments of government. Committees are multi-party. Hearings are often public, and they can call on organisations and individuals from the community. Well, now that we know a little more about the Senate, let's go back to that bill being sent over from the House of Representatives.
And I have to report that the committee has considered the bill, agreed to the same without amendment.
Order. The temporary chairman of committees reports that the committee has considered the bill and agreed to the same without amendment. The Honourable the Minister, Senator Webster.
I move that the bill be now read a third time.
The question is that this motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye, against say no. I think the ayes have it. Thank you. Order. Message number 266. Mr. President,
Ministers or their representatives introduce the bill for review. Again, it goes through 3 reading stages. If there are no amendments, a vote may be taken. If amendments are made, the bill is returned to the House of Representatives till both houses reach agreement. Then, a vote may be taken on the voices.
Mr. President, I move that the bill be now read a third time.
The question is that this bill be now read a third time. Those of that opinion say aye. Against say no. I think the ayes have it, Mr. Clerk.
Now the bill goes to the Governor-General for assent.
Yes, sir. Can I help you?
Peter Raffles from the House of Representatives.
Just one moment, sir.
The Governor-General's residence is Government House, 10 minutes away from Parliament. The Governor-General is the non-political head of state representing the Crown, and he is appointed by the Crown on the Prime Minister's recommendation. He has a ceremonial role, for instance, at the opening of Parliament and in receiving credentials of foreign ambassadors. He also has a number of powers, most of which he exercises on the advice of his parliamentary ministers. He is kept informed of the affairs of the nation at Executive Council meetings held here about once a week. Once signed by the Governor-General, the bill has become an Act of Parliament and is legally binding. Now it has to be distributed and administered, which involves the Minister, his Public Service Department, the Judiciary and the public. The business of government is endless.
I would ask, will the Minister, through the government, make a statement that no drilling will take place from the barrier reef?
There are many ways in which we as voters can keep in touch with what is happening in Parliament. ABC Radio broadcasts Parliament live. The House of Representatives and the Senate go to air on alternate days. Political reporters keep a stream of information flowing through the media. Parliamentary committees, particularly Senate and House of Representatives standing committees, sometimes go on location to meet the people.
Your last comment about public opinion and public awareness.
We can visit Parliament ourselves. There are 114 seats for the public in the House of Representatives and 160 in the Senate. We can organise petitions through our local MP. Occasionally they bear fruit, like these, sent en bark to the House of Representatives by the Aboriginal Yirrkala tribe in 1963 and 1968. They resulted in a parliamentary committee being set up to visit the tribe. Your local Member of Parliament is your closest personal link with the system. When Parliament is not sitting, MPs are usually to be found working in their electorates. However, it is still the grassroots voter at home who is the basis of the federal parliamentary system.